Do we know what we're talking about?
Season 3.
Hi, I'm John Stevens.
This is Matt Russell. This is Pod Have Mercy.
Yeah, so today it's just me and the doc, Dr. Rick No, who is a friend of mine. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for coming and just chopping it up and chatting about things. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, you would think automatically, since we have a doctor, we'd be talking about COVID, but alas, we're not going to talk about COVID. We might, but that's not what I think is fascinating about your story. So you and I know, and people who are paying attention know, that Afghanistan is big in the news, and there have been hundreds of that. I mean, what do I think, about 120, 30, 40,000 people that have left the country, a lot of them refugees. I think the vast majority of them refugees. And so this past week we had a call with Interfaith Ministries, which is one of the local ministries that does refugee services. And you and I were chatting beforehand. They say that we could get anywhere from 2,000-3,000. I think it's going to be a lot more than that, because at one of the military installations here in Texas, I've heard they already have 10,000 refugees that are there, and more coming. And so, you know, the way they're doing it now, they come in, and then a lot of the nonprofits help, and they get resettled to communities like Houston in the Gulfton area, where a lot of them will come. We've seen that with Syrian refugees in the past year. And, you know, we talked about ways to be helpful and all that kind of stuff, which we can talk about it in a little bit. What made me think about you, and you and I were texting, is not only do we know each other from golf, we know each other from just running around and stuff like that, but man, your story of your family, you and your family were refugees. And I'd just like you to just kind of share your story so people can hear what it looks like. Because I think sometimes this whole thing about refugees and stuff is so politicized, you know, and it gets really into this negative conversations and stereotypes. It's like, we'll hear from someone who really is like, has been through it. And that's you.
Well, first, John, thanks again for having me. Just watching the news over the in the events over the past several weeks, so I've just been filled with a flood of emotions. It's heartbreaking when you see the events that have taken place. Just the sheer desperation that you can see in these stories, on the faces of these Afghans, and it brings me back to the experience that my family and I had when we fled South Vietnam at the end of the Vietnam War in April of 1975. I was a few days before turning 3 at the time, so I don't have any personal memory of it. But I'm a big fan of history, and I've talked to my dad and a lot of relatives about that time. And so the events in Afghanistan have really made me think about our own personal experience and all that entailed. And what that entailed was a lot of people that had huge hearts that helped my family and I along the way, from the U.S. military to other Western militaries to churches, not-for-profit organizations. Just to make a very long story short, we traveled to 4 different refugee camps from our exodus in Saigon to finally landing in the United States. And those refugee camps were in the Philippines, Guam, Hawaii, and then we finally landed at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. And
you could have stayed in Hawaii.
I could have stayed in Hawaii at Tripler.
Arkansas.
That's right. So there were 4 main military refugee camps in the U.S. at that time. Yeah. And my family and I were assigned to the one in Arkansas. My wife and her family got very lucky. They were in Fort Walton Beach, Florida.
Oh, there you go.
But there you go. And so being in a family of 7, so I've got 4 siblings. In American terms, we had a huge family. So a family of 7. At this point, President Ford had passed the Indochina Refugee Assistance Act in May of '75. The World Council of Churches was heavily involved in trying to get sponsors for these 120,000 or so Vietnamese refugees that had just landed in the United States. And so we were at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, for several months in the summer of 1975, and then a church in Panora, Iowa, Panora Church of the Brethren.
Really?
They stepped up and sponsored our family, provided us with an apartment in Panora, Iowa, which is a small retirement community 45 minutes northwest of Des Moines. Gave my dad a job, started my older siblings in school, and we were there for 6 months, the first 6 months of our time in the U.S. We connected with other relatives who were also sponsored by other churches throughout the country, and then over the next 5 years moved from Oklahoma to California. In California, my parents both got 2-year electronic technical degrees, and then we moved to Houston in 1980 when my dad got a job with Texas Instruments.
Oh, yeah.
And then my mom was one of the first 250 employees at Compaq, and the rest of the American dream is history, as
That's
you might
amazing.
say. So we've been very, very blessed, very fortunate, and no way would we be here where we are at today without the assistance and help and love from so many.
I've heard you talk before about the relationship with the church, and you recently, not that long ago, you recently went back, but it was just interesting how those connections that this little church, wanted to do something for a refugee family out in the middle of Iowa.
Right.
Which just goes to show anybody can help. But there was a unique connection there.
Absolutely. In the summer of 2005, my younger sister actually had the idea to, on the 30th anniversary of our time here in the United States, she thought it'd be a great idea to go back to that church and let them know that, first to say thank you, but also let them know that we had not forgotten, what they had done for us. So we were able to, myself, my younger sister, my oldest brother, and our parents went up to Panora, Iowa. They had a reception for us on the Saturday evening before the church service. Prior to that, I kind of interviewed my dad, and we just sat outside for a few hours, and I said, tell me about the last 24 to 48 hours in Vietnam, and he gave me this, blow by blow account of how we were able to flee Saigon as it was as the Viet Cong were about to take over the city. So we were able to see a lot of the key members of the church who had helped us, who were instrumental in getting the church to agree to sponsor a refugee family, had passed, but a lot of their spouses and kids and children and so forth, who are grown now, were still there and remembered us. And at the reception, there was a lot of photos and so forth and memorabilia of our family when we were there for 6 months in the late 1975. So we had this reception. They asked me to speak at the service the next day, and I was honored to do that. And again, my message was, just one of eternal gratitude, and just to let them know that their efforts hopefully did surmount to something very, very positive in the life of a refugee family.
Now, I know you say you don't remember, but when you interviewed your dad, of especially like the final days or the final moments, and then you watch, even though you may not remember, you were there, so there's got to be some psychological DNA kind of thing, some memory that's even shared family memory, that emotive, you're going to get that emotional pathos from your dad, if from nothing else. But when you see all this stuff going on with Afghan refugees, what was it like for your dad, and just trying to get his family out? I look at this and it seems...
Yeah, that's a great question, and John, and in my earlier comments, the word I used was desperation, and that's the feeling that he really described in that last 24 hours, because he realized, as someone who was very educated and also a captain in the South Vietnamese Army, that if he wasn't able to flee, then he personally would be imprisoned and who knows what else, tortured, etc. But more so, he realized that with the regime that was about to take over, just that chance of free will, personal free will, and opportunity would be taken away. And that was his biggest motivating factor to do everything possible to get he and his family and an extended family out of Vietnam. And so in that 24-hour period, he was very key in getting 37 family members out.
Wow.
In that 24-hour period.
So he wasn't just thinking about him and y'all. I mean, he was thinking about extended family.
Yeah, he was driving his moped all over Saigon. This is, spring of 1975, so there wasn't any group texting or emailing or anything like that. And so he went, like phone lines were down and so forth. So he went from family to family, house to house to notify as many of his siblings' families as possible to meet at this U.S. cargo warehouse. And thankfully we were there just at the right time and got on a couple of U.S. military buses that took us to the Tan Son Nhut airport. And then from there, were waited in a hangar until it was safe enough to board a couple of U.S. Chinook helicopters that took us out to a cargo ship out in a U.S. cargo ship called the Green Hornet out in the South China Sea. And
Green Hornet.
Yep. And so we spent.
Was it like it was like an old-timey superhero or something?
Definitely my hero. So we went on that ship to the Philippines and then made our way across.
If I remember, I could be wrong, and you could say, "Yeah, you're wrong." But for some reason, it was like the timing of y'all like arriving. Wasn't there some like the timing was perfect or something when you arrived at the location?
Right. So my dad, one of my dad's really close friends who has since passed, worked for the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, and he had gotten word that this was going to be one of the key meeting and pickup points during the last 2 days. So this was the day before Saigon fell. So this is April 29th. 1975, and it was in the mid-afternoon, and we got to the U.S. cargo warehouse, and there were already thousands of South Vietnamese people already there who'd also gotten word and so forth, but they were inside the grounds of the warehouse. So there was a fence and a wall, and they were already inside. At that point in time, we thought, oh, we were too late.
You missed it.
Yeah, literally we were too late, but about 30 minutes later, two U.S. Military buses pull up outside of the grounds where we were in line and waiting, and said, "Come on, it's time to go." And there wasn't any issue regarding who was there first or this or that. And and I think about the people that were ahead of us, who had arrived earlier at that U.S. Cargo warehouse, and I pray that that they eventually made it out of there. But I don't know that with any certainty.
Hey, I don't think, however the story happens, where you were in line or whatever, I can imagine the sort of the guilt and the fear everybody experiences.
Right.
I mean, you think about now, and you look at the news, and you wonder the people that have been camped out by the airport for however long. And probably have the right documentation, but it's like who gets to the right gate and who. Right. I mean, it's almost like there is no controlled system for this thing. I mean, it's very chaotic. Yeah. And that's why they talk about, people want to make it sound so easy, like it's easy to get everyone out. It's not even easy to get just the military out, much less when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that you're trying to get out.
Absolutely. It's controlled chaos would be is absolutely an oxymoron, and I would say it's more on the chaotic side than the controlled side.
One of the things too that fascinates me is in conversations, whether you want to say it's political or xenophobic. You can fill in any word you want, but there's, I think the vast majority of people in the United States look at refugees that have assisted the U.S. and have been partners and all this kind of stuff. They seem to be that, but there's always a small percentage of people that just, we don't want those people over here because, doggone it, they're taking American way of life or whatever. What I'm fascinated to hear from you is your story, your family story. Like your family took like that American dream by the horns. I know you went to Rice, but your daughter's a Longhorn, so you could take it by the horns. But I mean, I've just always been amazed. I mean, you and your family. I mean, it wasn't like, I mean, you didn't take it for granted.
We didn't, John, and I would say that, you know, we felt so lucky and fortunate and blessed to have made it out. And we, you know, kept up with relatives and friends who didn't make it out. And life turned out to be, even in Vietnam, turned out to be even worse than anticipated. So my parents instilled in my siblings and I just this sense of gratitude that we should have, and also a sense of make the most of every opportunity that you have, because life could be so different. And I personally felt that I was carrying the baton for a lot of the people that, and a lot of the 3-year-olds who, you know, at the time I turned 3 during the Exodus, I was carrying the baton for a lot of the 3-year-old kids that didn't make it out. And I didn't want to waste that opportunity, and felt that would sort of dishonor them, and that they weren't able to make it, but I was. So I just said, you know, we're blessed to be in the best country in the world. It's not perfect, but I just, we've been helped by so many people here, and during that whole process that, you know, I try to look at the good of what's here, you know, the good of people, and the good of you know, the best aspects of being an American, and so we just have this sense of every day is icing on the cake. It could have been so different, and in turn, you know, we try to make the best of it, and also, more importantly, think of how we can be that helper, that for somebody else, how can we show love the way that so many people showed love for us, and so many of our family members and countrymen and countrywomen. So.
Yeah, you look at all the divine timings that you have that, and then you have this church in Iowa, right? And they're planting seeds in your life, and then you move around. Then ultimately, I mean, you graduate from school, you go to Rice.
Yes, sir. And
you go to medical school.
I did.
Now you're a surgeon.
I am.
Cutting up on, I mean, so I think about, and I think if I remember correctly, I mean, all your family took advantage of the opportunities and have become successful in this country, contributing to what this country's about. I think that's the thing when I think back on the history. I mean, none of us, unless you're Native American, we all came here from somewhere.
That's right.
It just might have been a lot longer.
And I bet that all of us had someone along the way that was pretty instrumental and key, and gave us a nudge or a major helping hand.
Yeah,
and it wasn't all done by.
Yeah, it wasn't like I pulled myself up by my bootstraps by myself. Right. You know, I mean, you have to have some tenacity, you know, to accomplish anything in life. You got to have some wherewithal, but you also have to have some opportunities.
Yep.
And I think that's what our country does better than any country in the world, is that you have opportunities. It's not always easy, and like you said, I totally agree. We're not a perfect country.
No,
but the opportunities are there, and to think that, you know, your family is a refugee family in 1975, and then to look now and you think about, you got a daughter going to the University of Texas, you know, hook 'em. I shouldn't say that because my daughter's at the University of Oklahoma.
It's hard for me to say that
She's going to
too.
be, I know, she's not going to be happy about
right.
that. But But yeah, and then joining a sorority, and you think the things you're able to work to allow your children to have, and you want them to have the same opportunities.
Absolutely.
And then I think about these families that are escaping persecution, who have helped us and coming from. To me, I said this the other night. There was one of the news stations was interviewing us, me and Rabbi Strauss, and I just think this is not a political issue. It shouldn't be politicized. This is a humanitarian crisis. These are folks who have cooked for soldiers and helped and translated, and they've done everything, in helping with us. And if they get left there, their name's on a list.
That's right.
Probably not going to be a good outcome for them.
The way I think of it, John, it's a global community. I recognize that there are borders and so forth, but I try to keep it very simple in that, I just want to play a role in helping a fellow human who has the same very basic needs and wants that I do to be safe, to be healthy, to have an opportunity to thrive, to have an opportunity to give their families a chance to succeed and thrive. And so I try to keep it very, very simple and non-political. And so it's heartbreaking that the current situation has played out the way it has. I tell my kids all the time, you can only control what you can control, given your God-given abilities and gifts. And I anticipate that I'm excited in that we all will have an opportunity to help out some people
you and I
who are in a situation that was a lot out of their control.
Exactly. And out of our control.
That's right.
You and I didn't have anything, whatever somebody wants to argue about what happened in Afghanistan, good, bad, and different, you and I didn't have anything to do with that.
Right.
And the people arguing about it didn't have anything to do with it. But we can do something now.
Absolutely. We're about to have, who knows how many thousand new refugees, immigrants, but I just say new neighbors and friends who, again, are in a difficult circumstance, but again, have the same basic human needs and wants that you and I do. And I'm excited. I don't know if that's the right word, but I anticipate, an opportunity to help them the way that so many helped my family and I.
Yeah. And so we were on a call this past week, all of our pastors, with a group called Interfaith Ministries. Now, there's actually there's about 4 or 5 organizations in Houston that work with refugees. They do this all the time. They've been doing it for many years, whether it was Syria or Ethiopia or whatever it is all over the world. So when refugees come into the country under certain status, and one of the things we learned is there are like lots of different status stages. Some of them are already approved. Some of them will come in and go through the process of approval, but then they'll go to cities. So they come into a military installation, like in Texas, and then they'll come to Houston. Now, we're told it's anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000. I think it's going to be a lot more than that, but I could be wrong. That's just what they say. And there are going to be families, and there are apartment complexes in Gulfton, in the area of Houston, where a lot of these families are located. So what's good about that is they have a community of people from their country together. Right. But what people don't know is, so there's a refugee resource, but what happens, it costs a lot of money for these families to get over here. There's a lot of expense involved. And then when they come, if they are on what these lower status called parole status, then they do get money for certain things, but they don't get money for food or medical health care. And so the initial thing they just said to us was, the first thing we're going to need is financial contributions initially, just to defray the cost of that. So that's the thing we started here, and I know some other churches have done that as well, to just say that's the best way you can do it. So for us, it's at chapelwood.org/relief. You can go and find links there. I'm sure Memorial Drive Methodist has links as well. You can search their website, but anywhere you can go, you can also go to Interfaith Ministries, and there are other refugee groups as well.
I serve on the board for YMCA International Services.
Okay, good.
And they provide programs and services that you're describing to the T. Houston has a reputation for being extremely welcoming to the refugee and immigrant community. Houston happens to be the second largest Vietnamese American community in the United States. So a lot of these organizations, including YMCA International, developed in the late 1970s in response to the influx of
that makes sense.
of the Vietnamese American families such as myself. So I think we have the infrastructure for it. We have the history, and I know that I'm confident that we have the heart to do it as well.
So YMCA International is one that you've worked with. Are there other agencies you can point people to?
YMCA International, Catholic Charities.
Catholic Charities.
Yeah, those are the two main ones that. So one that I volunteer with directly, and then collaborating organization is Catholic Charities.
Yeah. Well, I would encourage people to support financially at this early stage. And then there's going to be opportunities just like your family. There'll be opportunities for people to adopt families.
Absolutely.
One of the things that they have on, if you go to Interfaith Ministries website, the early stages too is financial, but then like think about you're moving, you have nothing but like the bag you carry. I mean, when you're fleeing, you don't have anything.
Right.
So like clothing and just silverware or plates or a pot to cook something in. I mean, they have these apartments, but they have to be outfitted. It's just basic things like bunk beds. Like, we partner and built this summer, our youth ministry, just all they did was build these bunk beds, just low cost things where people who need places to sleep. So all of these things, like you said, together, the infrastructure that we're fortunate to live in a city that has a big heart and that has all this stuff together. So we're a good place for people to land.
Yeah. One other type of program that I want to highlight also is with YMCA International, we provide a lot of counseling services. So the amount of emotional, psychological, mental, anguish and stress after experiencing something like this, it's unimaginable, kind of indescribable. But we've definitely put more attention into those sort of mental health programs and services for these refugees as well. So.
Well, I think it's going to be an interesting time, and it's a good time for, Haiti's been through a lot. Now we have, as we're sitting here today, we just have Hurricane Ida going through. Zach, who's producing today for us, everybody knows Zach Blunt from Chapelwood. You have family staying with you?
Yeah, from Louisiana.
From New Orleans and Louisiana. Wow. So grandparents and cousins and everybody. 30 plus, and some of them are maybe going back tomorrow to just because I asked Zach, I said, well, how are they doing? How's his? Like, I don't know. I don't know what to look at. You don't know what to go back to. So,
well, Zach, thanks for doing that, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. It's so
awesome.
But there's so much need around, and then of course you got on top of all this, pandemic stuff.
Yeah, one of the statements I heard regarding, if there were traumatic injuries or folks that needed to be hospitalized because of the hurricane, that the hospitals in New Orleans are full because of COVID patients. Mm-hmm. And so I just, as a healthcare professional, I can't even imagine the type of triage issues and so forth when you have a pandemic and then, have a natural disaster on top of that, and just having orchestrating and organizing all of that.
It's hard when we have a doctor here not to talk about COVID, but for me, the main thing from you is that story, your family's story, to have the door open, the opportunity, you make the most of it. That's the way I'd like for people to look at refugees who are coming. I think when we're talking about this is also, because again, you can't have conversations now without people listening through a certain lens. There's a difference between refugees who are coming in, fleeing persecution and chaos, and people who are trying to illegally sneak into the country. Although some of those folks are seeking asylum and refugee status as well. We have a status for this. There is a process for refugees.
Absolutely.
And so I think we both agree we got a process, and our country should never be a country that's not welcoming to the refuge. The Statue of Liberty, what it says, bring me you're tired, you're weary,
that's right.
And they become a part of this, great one professor of mine calls it not a melting pot, it's a smelting pot, because actually they don't lose their chemical identity, but they kind of all blend together.
That's
so
right.
there's still the uniqueness of the intermingled stuff and everything. So I just would, encourage people to look at this as a wonderful opportunity for us to. I was sharing the other day. To me, that one of the greatest stories Jesus tells fits in this, is that story of the Good Samaritan. Because they were trying to trick him, but it's the Samaritan who is a different ethnicity, a different religious practice than the man in the ditch who helps. And so when Jesus says which one was the neighbor, the lawyer has to say the one who showed him mercy. He wouldn't even say the word Samaritan. He said the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus' response was very simple. It said, you go and do the same. You go and do likewise.
That's right.
And I thought, so this to me is like, there's someone in need. Doesn't matter if they're Muslim or Buddhist or whatever. We're called to help them if we can help them.
Absolutely.
And I think we have
it's
the
certainly
resources
not
to help them.
a political issue. It's a people issue.
Exactly. So COVID though, so Ivermectin, horse deworming, you're all about that, right? Are you prescribing that right and left now? Is this overwhelming?
No comment.
We
So
have,
as a surgeon,
we have fun on this podcast. We kind of let our hair
you go.
down.
That's right.
I will say, if you haven't heard, ivermectin is like a cow deworming medication. But you know what I learned? Here's how irony gets you. So I've even texting some people who are like, "What do you think about ivermectin?" I was like, "No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so." But the confusion is like, there's all this stuff on the internet. People talk about it. Then I'm like, it's for horse deworming. Then I go to the dermatologist last week and get all this stuff on. And go, oh, you have rosacea. We'll get you a little cream. I get the cream, Sulantra. And I look at it, and you know what it is? It's ivermectin cream. I'm like, ivermectin's everywhere.
It is.
I'm putting it on my face, but I'm not expecting it to cure COVID. It's supposed to help the red and the bumps on my skin for apparently, I don't know.
Yeah, I know a lot more. I think my funded knowledge is mainly on the front end, on the prevention end, than the treatment end. So, but as a general surgeon, I do not treat COVID.
No, I
directly.
understand.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to get you in a trouble thing. I'll get myself in trouble for both of us. But I'll just tell you that, I think there's a thing in the world now where people have, like, you're entitled to your own opinion, but then there's truth. There's just data. Now, the thing about data in the world we live in, which is a postmodern truth world, people take the data and they try to spin it to say whatever they want. What you cannot get away from is that in our region, 93% of the people who are hospitalized right now are unvaccinated people. And like 99% in the U.S. are unvaccinated people.
You cannot get away from that.
No. So
very clear fact.
And the average time, I think when we were on a call last week or something, the average time, if you are vaccinated, and if by chance you do go in the hospital, which is very, very rare if you're vaccinated, unless you're much older or transplant.
Sure, there are exceptions.
Average
absolutely.
case is like 4 days you stay in the hospital. Wherever you're unvaccinated, I know a guy who's been there for 2 weeks and he's in his 40s.
Yep.
And healthy.
Yep. Absolutely. I think the greatest show of love for your neighbor regarding this situation is to get vaccinated.
But I just don't want that chip in my arm. The tracking chip.
I don't either, and I
while
don't
I
think that's gonna happen.
while I download my apps on my iPhone.
Right.
I'm saying that with my tongue in my cheek, but no, I don't know, man. It's I think the thing I was talking to a guy. I have a guy I do some spiritual direction with, Jerry Weber, who's a great friend of mine, and I need spiritual direction and therapy now more than ever. I've learned.
Don't we all?
But one of the things, it's just I'm processing, honestly, as a pastor, it's hard. I'm a pastor to everybody, whether you've been vaccinated or unvaccinated, whether you're Republican or Democrat. It's hard not to be discouraged, and sometimes it's hard not to be angry.
And I'll speak for, a sentiment in the healthcare community right now is a lot of frustration. But one aspect that I'm not sure a lot of people are aware of is how taxed the healthcare system is currently from a facility and human resource standpoint. The hospitals and ICUs and regular beds are full overcapacity in many hospitals because of the high number of COVID-19 patients who are, as you stated, mainly unvaccinated. And so that's affecting the hospital's ability to take care of the everyday stuff that is continuing despite COVID, the heart attacks, the strokes,
the secondary. There
the
was
cases of appendicitis, etc.
Yeah, there was an article in the Houston Chronicle today or yesterday about a 46-year-old Army veteran, served in Afghanistan, and I think it was Bellevue or somewhere, and he had, I don't know what it was, but
he had gallstone pancreatitis.
Gallstone pancreatitis. Yeah, you read the article.
Uh-huh.
So, but they couldn't treat him, and they had nowhere to send him, and they're calling him around. There's no ICU, there's no hospital. Well, they finally got him like in the VA center, but it took so long that he died.
He passed from multi-system organ failure.
Yeah, and the doctor who's treated him said, I've never had anybody die from this. I've never treated anybody who had this, who died from this. So that's a delay in the system. I think about, okay, fine. What happens if you're in a car accident or you have a heart attack or a stroke?
That's right.
I'm hearing a lot of people going into the hospitals or taking their parents in the hospitals, and they're waiting days to get into a room.
Right.
Not because they don't have a room. They don't have staff. They don't have enough nurses on the floors. It just breaks my heart because it seems like we could have avoided this.
And I still, we can't undo the past. But going forward, I still think it's the most prudent individual action that will pay huge dividends for that individual, their families, and society as a whole.
Are you hearing are vaccinations like increasing like daily? For a while they got like real low, but I mean, I think I've heard like more and more people are going to get them. I hope
yes,
that's the case.
The latest I've read is approximately 62% of the U.S. population has received at least one dose, and we're now in the mid-50s regarding fully vaccinated. I still think that is a very disappointing number, but hopefully we'll be able to see those numbers rise sharply soon.
Well, I appreciate you coming by.
Thanks for having me, John. Yeah,
no, I do. I really do.
Yep.
I mean, you came to mind when the news started coming out about refugees in Afghanistan, and I thought, man, I got a friend who's got like one of these amazing stories, and just glad for you to come and share it with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, Matt's not here, but we have kind of a sign-off way we do, where I'll say my name, you say your name, then I'll say, Pod have mercy. You ready?
Yep.
A 1 and a 2. I'm John Stevens.
I'm Rick No.
And this is Pod have mercy.